November 8th, 1942, 3:17 a.m. Somewhere along the Moroccan coast near Safi, a young Wehrmacht Obergefreiter named Klaus Reinhardt watched through his binoculars as Allied landing craft materialized from the darkness. His platoon, positioned on the cliffs overlooking the beach, had been preparing for this moment. The intelligence briefings had been clear. American infantry, inexperienced, poorly trained, equipped with nothing that could threaten German armour. But Reinhardt didn't know that strapped to the back of nearly every fourth American soldier wading through the surf was a weapon that would fundamentally change the equation of infantry combat. A 5-foot tube of steel that to German eyes would initially appear laughable, primitive, something no modern army would ever deploy. But within 18 months that tube would become the most feared sound in German lines. The hollow crack followed by the scream of a rocket, followed by the catastrophic detonation that could split open a 30-ton tank like a tin can. This is the story of how German troops ignored, mocked and dismissed the American bazooka, right up until the moment it started tearing their armour apart. The weapon developed in 1918 by American space pioneer Robert Goddard had demonstrated a tube-fired rocket to the US Army Signal Corps at Ardennes Proving Ground in Maryland on November 6th. It showed promise. It showed potential. But 5 days later, the armistice-ending World War I was signed, and development stopped cold. The war to end all wars had ended, and there seemed no reason to continue. Nobody imagined that within 23 years the world would be engulfed in a conflict that would make the Great War look like a preview. Through the 1920s and 1930s, infantry anti-tank weapons remained primitive. Anti-tank rifles, essentially oversized bolt-action weapons firing armour-piercing bullets. They were heavy, cumbersome, and increasingly ineffective as tank armour grew thicker. Hand grenades modified for anti-tank use existed, but required a soldier to be dangerously close to a multi-ton killing machine to use them. The shaped charge anti-tank grenade showed promise. In tests, these devices could penetrate armour over 2 inches thick through a focused jet of explosive force. The problem was weight. At 3.5 pounds, they were too heavy to throw effectively. A man might manage 30 or 40 feet, putting him well within the kill zone of any tank's machine guns. What was needed was a delivery system, something that could launch these shaped charges from a safe distance with reasonable accuracy. In 1942, Lieutenant Edward Uhl of the US Army received exactly that assignment: develop a way to deliver the M10-shaped charge grenade capable of stopping German tanks. The solution came from serendipity in a junkyard. Uhl was walking past a scrap pile at Ardennes Proving Ground when he noticed a length of pipe, roughly 5 feet long, with a diameter that happened to match the size of the grenade being converted into a rocket. The idea hit him instantly. Put the tube on a soldier's shoulder with the rocket inside and away it goes. Within days, a prototype existed. A steel tube fitted with a rudimentary shoulder stock, a front grip, a basic sight fashioned from wire, and a battery-powered firing system with a trigger. It was crude. It was simple. But in May 1942, during field trials, it performed beyond anyone's expectations. The test was observed by Major General Gladian M. Barnes, Chief of Research and Engineering in the Ordnance Department, along with other senior officers. They had gathered to watch demonstrations of various spigot mortars, which were considered the most promising method for delivering shaped charges. The mortars failed to hit a moving tank. Not one successful strike. Then Uhl's shoulder-launched tube rocket system fired, multiple hits on a moving target. The sights had been fabricated that morning from a wire coat hanger bent around a broken nail, yet the accuracy was remarkable. General Barnes, impressed, fired the weapon himself. As he shouldered it and watched the rocket streak downrange, he couldn't help but comment, "It sure looks like Bob Burns' Bazooka." Bob Burns was one of the most popular comedians of the era. His signature prop was a bizarre musical instrument he'd constructed from plumbing pipe and a whiskey funnel, creating an odd trombone-like device he called a bazooka. The nickname stuck instantly. From that moment forward, the official designation, 2.36-inch rocket launcher M1, would be overshadowed by its informal name. To the troops, to the press, to history, it was the bazooka. Production moved with typical American industrial speed. On May 20th, 1942, General Electric in Bridgeport, Connecticut received the contract. By June 14th, they had completed the first batch of 5,000 units, 30 days from contract to delivery. 5,000 complex weapon systems, each requiring precise tolerances, electrical components, and careful assembly. This was American mass production at its finest, and it foreshadowed what was to come. The M1 Bazooka was elegantly simple. A smooth-bore steel tube 54 inches long, open at both ends. Weight unloaded just 18 pounds. A shoulder rest and pistol grip assembly on the rear third. Battery compartment in the stock holding 2 dry cell batteries. A basic sight mounted on top. The rocket, officially designated M6 Heat, was 19 inches long with a 2.36-inch diameter warhead containing 8 ounces of pentolite explosive, a shaped charge designed to focus explosive force into a molten jet capable of penetrating 5 inches of armor plate. The weapon required a 2-man crew. The gunner aimed and fired. The loader, carrying up to 6 rockets in a cloth bandolier, inserted the rocket from the rear, connected the electrical contact wires, and activated the safety. When the gunner squeezed the trigger, battery power ignited the rocket motor. Propellant burned for a fraction of a second, accelerating the rocket down the tube and out toward the target. Effective range was listed as 300 yards, but realistic combat engagement was under 150 yards for any hope of accuracy. In November 1942, thousands of these weapons shipped to American forces preparing for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. The troops received the weapons. They did not receive training. They did not receive manuals. They barely received explanation of what the weapon was or how it worked. The secrecy surrounding the bazooka's development meant that even officers had minimal information. One entire truckload of bazookas, shipped to troops at Kasserine Pass, sat unopened during the battle because nobody knew what they were or how to use them. The Germans captured that shipment intact. Unopened crates filled with a brand new American weapon, complete with ammunition and limited documentation. German intelligence officers examining the captures were initially puzzled, then intrigued. A shoulder-fired rocket launcher. The concept was sound. The execution seemed questionable. The 60mm warhead was small. The launcher appeared crude. German reports classified it as interesting but not threatening. That assessment would change. For the American troops actually deploying the bazooka in combat, the experience was mixed at best. The M6 rocket proved notoriously unreliable. In the heat of North African desert, rocket motors failed. In the moisture and salt air of the Pacific, the battery systems corroded and malfunctioned. The cold of European winters drained batteries to uselessness. Below 14 degrees Fahrenheit, the dry cells became too weak to fire the weapon. The rockets themselves were temperature sensitive. Do not fire below 0 or above 120 degrees. In combat conditions, these limitations were catastrophic. Then there were the design flaws. The original M6 rocket had a pointed nose. In testing, this seemed aerodynamically sound. In combat, it proved disastrous. When striking armor at an angle, the pointed nose deflected, bouncing off rather than penetrating. Tanks with sloped armor, which included most modern designs, were largely immune to frontal hits. The launcher had its own problems. Visible backblast revealed the shooter's position. The battery system was fragile and prone to failure. The wire wrapping around the tube intended to reinforce it sometimes came loose. In tropical conditions, the electrical contacts corroded. In Arctic conditions, they froze. By May 1943, after 6 months of combat use, the US Army had not received a single confirmed report of the bazooka successfully stopping a German tank. Not one. Further deployment was suspended pending improvements. To German forces observing these early encounters, the bazooka appeared to confirm every prejudice about American military technology. Over-engineered, unreliable, ineffective. German intelligence reports from North Africa described it as an interesting curiosity that posed minimal tactical threat. The shaped charge principle was sound, but the delivery system was flawed. The warhead was too small, the rocket was too slow, the range was insufficient. In short, it was typical American weapons development. Complicated solutions to problems better solved by simpler means. The Panzerfaust, Germany's own close-range anti-tank weapon, wouldn't enter service until 1943, and even then, it used a simpler recoilless rifle principle rather than rocket propulsion. The Germans were confident they had nothing to learn from the American design. That confidence was misplaced. Back in the United States, engineers were already addressing the bazooka's flaws. The pointed nose was replaced with a rounded, blunted design that wouldn't deflect on angled hits. The M6A1 rocket incorporated improved propellant less sensitive to temperature variations. The fin assembly was redesigned for better flight stability. The launcher itself received upgrades. The M1A1 version included an improved sight, better wire wrapping for reinforcement, and a rudimentary blast shield to protect the gunner from back pressure. More critically, American forces began developing actual training programs. Soldiers learned proper firing positions, they learned where to aim on different tank types. Side armour was vulnerable, rear armour was even more so, tracks could be disabled, engine compartments could be set ablaze. A well-trained bazooka team could be devastatingly effective if they knew what they were doing. The problem was getting close enough to use it. In July 1943, the improved M1A1 bazooka with M6A1 rockets deployed to Sicily for Operation Husky. The results were immediate and dramatic. On the streets of Biscari, an American bazooka team encountered a German Tiger I heavy tank. The Tiger, with frontal armour over 100 mm thick, was theoretically immune to the 2.36-inch warhead. Theoretically. The bazooka team waited until the Tiger was at close range, then fired at the driver's vision port, a narrow slit in the frontal armour used for viewing. The rocket, by pure chance or incredible skill, entered directly through this opening. The shaped charge detonated inside the tank. The Tiger was destroyed, its crew killed instantly. When news of this reached German intelligence, it was initially dismissed as propaganda. No infantry weapon could destroy a Tiger. The armour was too thick, the tank was too well protected. It was impossible. But the destroyed Tiger sat in the middle of Biscari, photographed, examined, and documented. The kill was real. The bazooka was real, and it was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. During the Sicily campaign, M1A1 bazookas were credited with destroying 5 German tanks, including 4 Panzer IVs and the legendary Tiger kill. More significantly, they proved effective against fortified positions, bunkers, and enemy strongpoints. The shaped charge didn't just penetrate armour, it could blast through concrete, blow apart reinforced positions, and create breaches in defensive works. The weapon's versatility was becoming apparent, but Germany was learning too. The captured bazookas from Kasserine Pass had made their way to ordnance testing facilities. German engineers studied the design carefully, noting its strengths and weaknesses. The rocket propulsion system was effective, the shaped charge was powerful, but the caliber was too small and the battery ignition system was unreliable. Germany could improve on the design. By October 1943, the result was ready. The Raketenpanzer Büchs 54, officially designated, unofficially called the Panzerschreck, meaning tank terror, or more informally among troops, the Offenrohr, meaning stovepipe, because of the enormous smoke cloud it generated. The Panzerschreck was essentially a scaled-up bazooka, 88mm diameter instead of 60mm, longer tube, heavier warhead, greater penetration. The Germans had taken American innovation, and, with typical German engineering thoroughness, made it better. The 80mm warhead could penetrate up to 200mm of armour at optimal angle. This meant it could defeat almost any tank in service, including Soviet heavy tanks that German conventional anti-tank weapons struggled against. The Panzerschreck replaced the unreliable battery system with a magneto-electric firing mechanism activated by the trigger. More reliable, weather-resistant, and requiring no batteries to fail in cold weather. There was one significant drawback. Unlike American bazooka rockets, which extinguished before leaving the tube, Panzerschreck rockets continued burning for about 6 feet after launch. The backblast was intense, hot enough to cause severe burns. Operators were required to wear heavy gloves, a protective poncho, and a gas mask without a filter. Even with protection, anyone standing within 30 feet behind the weapon risked serious injury. Later models added a blast shield to protect the operator, but this increased the weight to 24 pounds. Production began immediately at Hassag works in Muselwitz and other facilities. By the end of the war, Germany would produce 290,000 Panzerschreck launchers and over 2 million rockets. It became one of the most effective infantry anti-tank weapons of the war. The irony was profound. Germany had dismissed the bazooka as an inferior American weapon, then copied the design, improved it, and deployed it en masse. But while Germany was busy improving on the captured bazooka design, America wasn't standing still. In October 1943, the M9 Bazooka entered production. This addressed many of the remaining flaws in the original design. The launcher broke into two pieces for easier transport. Paratroopers, who had found the 54-inch M1 impossibly awkward to carry during jumps, embraced the breakdown design. When assembled, the M9 was actually slightly longer than the M1 at 61 inches, improving accuracy and range. The battery firing system was replaced with a magneto system, borrowed directly from captured panzers. One of the beautiful ironies of warfare, America copies Germany copying America. The M9 featured an improved optical sight, replacing the crude wire arrangement. A proper reflector sight allowed for range adjustment, windage compensation, and improved target acquisition. Most critically, the M9 could fire the new M6A3 rocket. This improved design featured the rounded nose less prone to deflection, a more stable fin arrangement, and improved propellant. Penetration increased to 4 inches of armour at optimal angles, still less than the Panzerschreck, but sufficient for most German tanks when used correctly. The M9 began reaching frontline units in early 1944, just in time for the invasion of Normandy. For German forces in France, the Bazooka had transformed from a curiosity into a genuine threat. Panzer crews who had survived the Eastern Front, where Soviet anti-tank rifles and grenades posed constant danger, now faced a weapon that could kill them from 150 yards away. Operated by any infantry team with basic training, it changed defensive tactics fundamentally. In the close terrain of Normandy's Bocage country, with its thick hedgerows, narrow roads, and limited visibility, German armour found itself channeled into killing zones. American infantry, equipped with bazookas and trained in ambush tactics, waited in concealment. A panzer would advance down a lane. From 50 yards away, a bazooka team would fire at the vulnerable side or rear armour. The hollow crack of the launch, the scream of the rocket motor, then the shattering detonation as the shaped charge jet penetrated armour. Inside the tank, the effect was catastrophic. The copper jet, travelling at thousands of feet per second, punched through armour plate. The pressure wave killed or wounded anyone in the immediate area. Molten metal fragments ricocheted through the confined interior, ammunition cooked off, fuel ignited. Within seconds, the tank transformed from an impregnable fortress to a burning coffin. German tankers developed intense respect for the weapon they had once mocked. Oberleutnant Hans Becker, commanding a Panther tank in the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, recorded in his diary after an engagement near Caen. "We were advancing through a sunken lane when the first rocket struck. The sound is distinctive, unforgettable. A crack followed by a whistling scream. The rocket hit Klein's tank on the side, penetrating just below the turret ring. The explosion was visible even through the smoke. When Klein's tank stopped, burning, we knew. The Americans had their tank terror now, just like we had given them, except theirs come from any hedgerow, any roadside position. We cannot see them until they fire. By then, it's often too late." Becker's experience was increasingly common. In the fighting around Krinkelt-Rocherath during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, American infantry demonstrated exactly how effective well-trained bazooka teams could be. The German 12th SS Panzer Division launched a major assault on the twin villages, attempting to break through American defensive positions. What should have been a steamroller attack by elite armoured forces turned into a nightmare. American infantry from the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions had prepared defensive positions specifically optimised for anti-tank combat. Bazooka teams positioned in foxholes and cellars had clear fields of fire covering the main approach routes. Anti-tank mines were laid in depth, including daisy-chain arrangements that could disable multiple vehicles. As German armour advanced through the fog and snow, American defenders waited. The first German vehicles struck mines and stopped. Following tanks bunched up trying to manoeuvre around the disabled vehicles. That's when the bazookas opened fire. From ranges of 30 to 70 yards, American teams fired repeatedly at the stalled German armour. Side shots penetrated. Rear shots were devastating. The fighting lasted through the night of December 17th to 18th. When dawn broke, 21 German armoured vehicles had been destroyed by bazooka fire alone. Another 27 fell to anti-tank guns and mines. The 12th SS Panzer Division, one of Germany's elite formations, had been shattered. For ISS Panzer Corps, the losses were so severe that operational plans had to be completely revised. One American soldier interviewed after the battle described the experience. You had to let them get close. That was the hardest part. Waiting while this 30-ton monster rolled toward you, knowing that if you fired too early you'd miss, too late, and you'd be crushed. The training said 75 yards for a side shot, 50 yards for a rear shot. We'd practice on tank silhouettes and wrecks when we could, but in combat, in the snow, in the dark, it was different. You fired when your gut said fire. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. We lost guys who got too brave, tried to get too close. The tank's machine guns would get them, or they'd get crushed when tanks pivoted. But when it worked, when you hit them right, the explosion was incredible. The tank would stop, smoke would pour out, sometimes the whole thing would brew up if you hit the ammunition. You knew you'd just saved lives. Every tank you stopped was a tank that couldn't kill your buddies. The German response to the bazooka threat evolved constantly. Tanks began mounting additional armor plates called Schürzen on the sides and rear. These spaced armor plates were designed to prematurely detonate shaped charges before they reached the main armor. In practice, they were marginally effective. The standoff distance required to defeat a shaped charge was about 3 feet. Schürzen plates, mounted inches from the hull, provided some protection, but not enough. Close-quarters defense weapons were added to tanks, remote-controlled machine, guns, grenade launchers, even flame projectors in some cases. These allowed tank crews to suppress nearby infantry without exposing themselves. Tank formations began travelling with dedicated infantry support to clear potential ambush positions. The panzer grenadiers would advance alongside the tanks, suppressing enemy positions and hunting for anti-tank teams. Effective when executed properly, but it required combined arms coordination that was increasingly difficult as Germany's military situation deteriorated. American forces, meanwhile, were discovering additional uses for the bazooka beyond tank killing. Against fortified bunkers, the shaped charge could blow through 2 feet of reinforced concrete. Against buildings, it created devastating breaches. Against personnel in the open, the blast and fragmentation effects were lethal at close range. In the Pacific Theater, Marines used bazookas to crack open Japanese pillboxes and fortified cave positions. The shaped charge jet, designed to penetrate armour, worked equally well on concrete and stone. One famous example involved Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter, an artillery observation pilot flying an L-4 Grasshopper. Frustrated by his inability to defend himself during low-altitude reconnaissance missions, Carpenter mounted 6 bazookas on his aircraft, 3 on each wing strut. In September 1944, over France, Carpenter used his improvised gunship to attack German armour. Flying low and slow, he would dive on tanks, fire his bazookas in sequence, then climb away. The accuracy was questionable, but the psychological impact was enormous. German tank crews reported being attacked by aircraft firing rockets. The idea that even observation planes might be carrying anti-tank weapons created paranoia. Carpenter was credited with destroying or disabling 14 German tanks and armoured vehicles before the war's end, earning him the nickname Bazooka Charlie and widespread media attention. The concept proved influential. Post-war helicopter gunships armed with rockets would become standard, directly descended from Carpenter's improvised experiments. By late 1944, the bazooka had evolved from a curiosity into a standard infantry weapon. Every American infantry company had a bazooka section. Training emphasized the weapon's capabilities and limitations. Soldiers learned that frontal shots on heavy tanks were largely futile. Panthers and Tigers had armor too thick to penetrate from the front. But sides, rear, and weak points remained vulnerable. The key was patience, positioning, and courage. Getting close enough to guarantee a kill required accepting significant risk. German tankers, interviewed after the war, consistently cited the bazooka as one of their most feared weapons, not because it was inevitably lethal. A well-armoured tank could often survive a bazooka hit, but because it was unpredictable and omnipresent. Any hedgerow might conceal a bazooka team. Any roadside position could hold an ambush. Every time a tank entered close terrain, the crew knew they were vulnerable. The psychological impact was significant. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, who commanded a Panther company in Belgium, described it in a 1946 interview. The Eastern Front was brutal, but predictable. You knew where the enemy anti-tank guns were, generally. You could suppress them with artillery or maneuver around them. In France, in Belgium, in Germany at the end, the Americans were everywhere. Their bazooka teams would lie in wait, sometimes in positions we'd already cleared. They'd let the first tanks pass, then hit the third or fourth vehicle in the column, blocking the road. Then they'd hammer the stalled column from multiple positions. Some of our most experienced crews died to infantry with rockets. Men who had survived years on the Eastern Front, killed by soldiers who had been civilians a year earlier. The Americans trained their infantry well, they gave them weapons that worked, and they taught them to be brave. That combination was devastating. We mocked the bazooka when we first encountered it. By the end, we feared it. The numbers supported this assessment. In the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, American infantry using bazookas and other anti-tank weapons claimed hundreds of German armoured vehicles. Exact attribution is difficult. Many tanks were hit by multiple weapons, mines, artillery, tank destroyers and bazookas, but post-battle analysis indicated that a significant percentage of German armour losses came from infantry anti-tank weapons, with the bazooka being the primary system. During the fighting at Bastogne, surrounded American forces used bazookas to defend the perimeter against repeated German armour attacks. The 101st Airborne Division, dug in around the town, positioned bazooka teams at key road junctions and defensive positions. When German tanks attempted to break through, they faced concentrated fire from multiple directions. One action involved a single American lieutenant defending a crossroads with two bazooka teams. A column of 5 German tanks approached in the pre-dawn darkness. The lieutenant ordered his teams to hold fire until the lead tank was within 50 yards. The first shot disabled the lead tank, blocking the road. The second shot hit the trailing tank, trapping the column. Over the next 30 minutes, all 5 tanks were destroyed by repeated bazooka fire at close range. The Germans attempted several counterattacks to recover the position and clear the road. Each time, bazooka fire drove them back. The crossroads held. In the massive battles of early 1945, as Allied forces drove into Germany itself, the bazooka remained a critical infantry weapon. By now, American forces were well trained in its use. New recruits received extensive training on proper employment, and veteran units had developed sophisticated tactics. One innovation was the bazooka ambush patrol. A squad-sized element would infiltrate behind German lines set up along a likely route of enemy armour movement and wait. When German tanks appeared, the patrol would engage at close range, destroy one or more vehicles, then withdraw before the enemy could react. These raids forced German armour to move with extensive infantry screens and reconnaissance, slowing their operational tempo. In urban combat, particularly during the fighting in German cities, bazookas proved invaluable for street fighting. Buildings provided concealment for close approaches. Side streets and alleys offered multiple ambush positions. German tank crews found urban combat nightmarish. Every corner might hide an anti-tank team. The final evolution of the World War II bazooka was the M18, an experimental aluminum version designed to reduce weight. At just 15 pounds unloaded compared to 18 for the steel M9, it was easier to carry during extended operations. Production began in late 1945, but the war ended before significant numbers were deployed. But the bazooka's story didn't end with World War II. When North Korean forces invaded South Korea in June 1950, they were equipped with Soviet T-34 Stereo-85 medium tanks. These tanks had been the backbone of Soviet armour on the Eastern Front, with 90mm frontal armour and an 85mm main gun. They were formidable. American forces in Korea, including the initial units from the 24th Infantry Division, were equipped with the same M9 and M9A1 bazookas that had served in World War II. When they engaged T-34s, the results were devastating for the Americans. The 2.36-inch warhead simply could not penetrate T-34 frontal armour. Side and rear shots were possible but difficult under combat conditions. American infantry found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't stop with their standard anti-tank weapon. The first engagements at Osan and other initial battles saw American forces overrun by T-34s that simply drove through infantry positions, impervious to bazooka fire. The shock was severe. Had the bazooka become obsolete? No, the problem was that tank armour had continued evolving while the bazooka had remained static since 1943. The solution already existed. During the final months of World War II, American ordnance had observed the effectiveness of the German Panzerschreck with its 80-in nail-metal warhead. They had begun development of a similar super bazooka with increased caliber. The M20 Super Bazooka, with an 18mm warhead, had been designed and produced in limited numbers before war's end, then mothballed due to budget cuts. When the Korean War broke out, production restarted immediately. Rock Island Arsenal sent its first shipment of M20 Super Bazookas just 13 days after the war began. The M20 was a substantial improvement. The 89mm warhead could penetrate 11 inches of armour, more than double the M9's capability. The launcher was made of aluminum, keeping weight manageable despite the increased size. It broke down into 2 sections for transport. The optical sight was improved. Most critically, it could defeat T-34 armour reliably. When M20s reached frontline units in late 1950, the situation changed dramatically. American infantry once again had an effective anti-tank weapon. T-34s were no longer invulnerable. The Korean experience demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of the bazooka concept. Against modern armour, calibre and warhead size mattered. The 2.36-inch warhead that had been adequate in 1943 was marginal by 1950 and would be obsolete by 1960. But the fundamental principle remained sound. A shoulder-fired rocket launcher gave infantry an organic anti-tank capability. The bazooka concept, copied by Germany as the Panzerschreck, inspired the Soviet RPG series, which began with the RPG-2 in 1949. The RPG-2 was essentially a copy of the German Panzerfaust 150, which itself had been influenced by bazooka design. The RPG-7, introduced in 1961, became one of the most widely produced weapons in history. Over 9 million units serving with armies worldwide directly descended from the bazooka principle. America moved on to new designs. The M72 Law, introduced in 1963, was a disposable one-shot weapon, lighter, simpler and cheaper to produce than reloadable launchers. The AT-4, developed in the 1980s, continued the evolution. Today's shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons are sophisticated guided missiles. The FGM-148 Javelin can engage tanks from over 2 miles away with fire-and-forget guidance. But they all trace their lineage back to that crude steel tube and rocket that Lieutenant Uhl assembled from junkyard parts in 1942. The transformation from mockery to terror took less than 2 years. In November 1942, German forces captured bazookas at Kasserine Pass and dismissed them as interesting but ineffective. By July 1943, a bazooka had killed a Tiger tank, theoretically impossible. By October 1943, Germany was mass-producing their own copy, improved but clearly derivative. By December 1944, German tankers feared the weapon they had once laughed at, and with good reason. Let's examine the raw numbers. From 1942 to 1945, America produced 476,628 bazookas of all variants, along with over 15.6 million rockets. That's 33 rockets for every launcher produced. In European combat, bazookas were credited with destroying or disabling thousands of armoured vehicles. Exact numbers are impossible to determine because many vehicles were hit by multiple weapon types. But after-action reports consistently show bazookas accounting for a significant percentage of infantry anti-tank kills. The kill ratio, bazookas fired versus tanks destroyed, was relatively low, perhaps 20 to 30 rockets fired for every confirmed kill. But this statistic is misleading. Many bazooka shots were fired at bunkers, buildings and other non-tank targets. Suppressive fire, shots taken at excessive range, and misses all inflated the expenditure rates. When properly employed by trained crews at appropriate ranges, the kill rate was dramatically higher. The weapon's real effectiveness lay not just in vehicles destroyed, but in tactical impact. German armour, facing bazooka-equipped infantry, had to modify tactics. Close terrain became dangerous. Urban combat became suicidal. Independent tank operations without infantry support became impossible. The bazooka forced combined arms warfare. It made infantry relevant in armoured combat. This psychological and tactical effect multiplied its physical impact. Consider the German perspective at war's end. General Major Otto Meyer, who commanded various panzer formations on the Western Front, stated in a 1947 interview, "The bazooka represented everything we came to fear about American warfare. It was mass-produced. It was simple enough for any soldier to use. It was effective enough to threaten our best tanks under the right conditions, and there were so many. Everywhere we went, American infantry had bazookas, multiple teams per company, unlimited ammunition, constant threat. We learned to respect it eventually. Earlier we had laughed. We saw the first captured examples and thought, this is typical American engineering. Complicated, heavy, using batteries that would fail in combat. We were wrong. The Americans improved it rapidly. They trained their infantry to use it effectively, and they produced it in quantities we couldn't match. By 1944, we were using captured American weapons alongside our own panzerschrecks because we couldn't produce enough of our own. That should tell you everything about the situation. This admission is particularly significant coming from a German General Staff officer. The Wehrmacht prided itself on tactical and technical superiority. Admitting that a weapon they had initially dismissed became so effective that they had to copy it and even use captured examples was a profound reversal. The bazooka's development occurred in parallel with America's broader industrial mobilization. In 1942, American industry was still transitioning to wartime production. By 1943, production rates were climbing dramatically. By 1944, American industry was outproducing the rest of the world combined. The bazooka exemplified this process. Initial batches were produced slowly, with quality issues and reliability problems. Within a year, production standardized, quality improved, and output increased exponentially. By 1944, bazookas were being produced faster than they could be distributed. The training pipeline evolved similarly. Initial deployments saw untrained troops receiving weapons they didn't understand. Within months, formal training programs existed. By 1944, every infantry replacement received bazooka familiarization. Specialized anti-tank training for dedicated bazooka teams became standard. The weapon's simplicity aided this process. Unlike complex systems requiring weeks of training, a soldier could learn basic bazooka employment in a few days. Proficiency required more time, but basic competence came quickly. This accessibility made the bazooka democratic in a sense. Any infantry squad could have anti-tank capability. Elite units didn't monopolize the weapon. Frontline troops, regardless of specialization, could engage armor if necessary. Compare this to German anti-tank weapons. The Panzerschreck required more extensive training due to its more complex firing mechanism and dangerous backblast. The Panzerfaust was simpler, but less capable at range. Neither were produced in quantities matching American bazooka production. German infantry increasingly faced armor without adequate anti-tank weapons, while American infantry had multiple options: bazookas, anti-tank grenades, anti-tank mines, and by 1944, direct fire support from tank destroyers and towed guns. The bazooka also represented a shift in military philosophy. Pre-war doctrine assumed infantry needed heavy towed anti-tank guns to defeat armor. These weapons required trucks or horses to move, crews of 6 or more men, and substantial ammunition supply. They were effective but inflexible. The bazooka, by contrast, could be carried by 2 men, operated from any position, and required minimal support infrastructure. 2 men with a bazooka. Now I'll continue the script from where it left off. Maintaining accuracy and the established narrative style, could achieve what required a 6-man towed gun crew before. This democratization of anti-tank capability represented a fundamental shift in military doctrine. The bazooka succeeded because it embraced American strengths: mass production, continuous improvement, practical simplicity over theoretical perfection. When the initial design failed, it was fixed. When limitations appeared, they were addressed. When soldiers needed training, programs were developed. This iterative approach, backed by industrial capacity, created a weapon system that evolved faster than the enemy could respond. The Germans saw this process and tried to match it. Their Panzerschreck was technically superior in many respects: larger warhead, better penetration, more effective against heavy armor. But Germany couldn't match American production rates. By late 1944, German industry was collapsing under strategic bombing and resource shortages. Panzerschreck production suffered accordingly. Meanwhile, American factories were producing bazookas faster than the army could distribute them. The legacy of the bazooka extends far beyond World War II. The weapon concept inspired the development of Soviet RPG series, beginning with the RPG-2 in 1949 Wikipedia. The Soviet Union developed these weapons by studying captured American bazookas and German Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. Wikipedia Namu Wiki. The RPG-2 combined elements from both designs: a reloadable launcher like the Bazooka with design influences from the German weapons. The RPG-7, introduced in 1961, became one of the most widely produced weapons in history, with over 9 million units manufactured military factory, the National Interest. It serves with armies worldwide and remains in frontline service today, 6 decades after its introduction. The lineage is unmistakable. The shoulder-fired, rocket-propelled anti-tank weapon pioneered by the Bazooka became a standard component of infantry forces globally. In American service, the Bazooka evolved into new forms. The M20 Super Bazooka was completely redesigned at the close of World War II, with a larger 3.5-inch caliber, weighing 14.3 pounds and firing a 9-pound M28A2 heat rocket. Wikipedia. Though bearing superficial resemblance to the Panzerschreck, the M20 had greater effective range and penetrating capability and was nearly 20% lighter than its German counterpart. Wikipedia. When the Korean War erupted in June 1950, American forces initially deployed with the older 2.36-inch bazookas. These proved completely inadequate against North Korean T-34 or 85 tanks, with soldiers reporting that bazooka shells literally bounced off the oncoming armor. Global security. The shock was severe. At the Battle of Osan, American forces faced T-34s they couldn't stop with their standard anti-tank weapons. The M20 Super Bazooka, although on the drawing board since the end of World War II, had not been put into production due to cutbacks in defense spending, and none of the newer 3.5-inch launchers had been issued to Far East units. Global security. The response was immediate. Within 5 days of General MacArthur's request for the new launchers, the first batch was airlifted to Korea, accompanied by instructors. Global security. The 24th Infantry Division received the first consignment, and on July 20, 1950, the second day of the Battle of Tiyun, the 3.5-inch bazookas accounted for 8 T-34 tanks on their first day of combat use. Global security. The M20 could penetrate 11 inches of armor, more than sufficient to defeat T-34 protection. By the end of the Korean War, South Korean forces alone had received 1,658 M9A1s before the war, and 609 M-Ding-Awasas, along with 4,607 M20s by war's end. Wikipedia, Australian War Memorial. The Super Bazooka remained in American service through the early stages of the Vietnam War. It was gradually replaced by more modern systems designed for evolving threats. The M72 Law, introduced in 1963, represented the next evolution, a single-shot disposable launcher that was lighter and simpler than reloadable systems. No maintenance, no complex loading procedures, just extend, aim, and fire. When expended, discard the tube. This disposable philosophy reflected changing military economics and the lessons of Vietnam, where weight and simplicity were critical. The AT-4, adopted in the 1980s, continued this evolution with improved penetration and more sophisticated warhead designs. Modern American forces use the FGM-148 Javelin, a fire-and-forget guided missile system capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding 2 miles. The Javelin costs roughly $80,000 per missile. Compare this to the Bazooka, which, in 1944, cost approximately $18 per rocket in inflation-adjusted terms. The technological sophistication has increased exponentially, as has the cost. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Give infantry soldiers an organic anti-tank capability. Make it portable, relatively simple to operate, and effective enough to threaten armoured vehicles. Every modern shoulder-fired anti-tank system traces its conceptual lineage to that crude steel tube Lieutenant Uhl assembled in 1942. The story of the Bazooka is ultimately a story about adaptation and underestimation. German forces, confident in their technical superiority, dismissed the weapon based on early encounters with unreliable prototypes deployed by untrained troops. They failed to recognize what the weapon represented. Not a finished product, but a platform for continuous improvement. Not a standalone system, but part of a larger industrial and training infrastructure capable of rapid iteration. By the time German intelligence recognized the true threat, American forces had already improved the weapon, trained their troops, and deployed it in massive numbers. The German response, copying and improving the design, validated American innovation even as it highlighted German desperation. Elite panzer divisions, the pride of German military engineering, reduced to using captured American weapons because their own production couldn't keep pace. The psychological impact exceeded the physical. Tank crews, previously confident in their armour protection, now had to fear every hedgerow, every roadside position, every urban street corner. The omnipresent threat of bazooka teams forced tactical changes that slowed German operations and reduced armour effectiveness. This psychological effect, multiplied across thousands of engagements, shaped the outcome of campaigns. In the Normandy breakout during the Ardennes offensive in the final battles in Germany, the bazooka was there, wielded by soldiers who had learned to use it effectively. The weapon that began as a curiosity, dismissed and mocked, became an essential tool of Allied victory. It represented American pragmatism, the ability to see a problem, develop a solution, improve it based on feedback, and produce it in overwhelming quantities. These were the same attributes that characterized American industrial mobilization generally. The bazooka was a microcosm of how America fought World War II. Today, the bazooka exists primarily in museums and private collections. The technology has been superseded by more sophisticated systems, but the name remains in popular culture, synonymous with shoulder-fired rocket launchers generally. When people say bazooka, they often mean any infantry anti-tank weapon, regardless of actual type. This linguistic dominance reflects the weapon's historical impact. It defined a category, and in military history, few weapons can claim to have gone from mockery to terror, from dismissed curiosity to feared necessity in the span of just 2 years. That transformation, driven by American industrial capacity, continuous improvement, and the courage of infantry soldiers willing to face tanks with a tube of steel and a rocket, represents one of World War II's most significant equipment stories. The Germans learned eventually to respect what they had initially dismissed. By then, it was too late. The bazooka had already changed the battlefield forever,